Hello everyone, and welcome to Dr. Carminati's YouTube channel. I'm thrilled to have you here today as we dive into a profound and thought-provoking topic inspired by a recent paper titled Quantum Information Theoretic Approach to the Hard Problem of Consciousness, which you can find at the link in the description below. We'll explore the nature of consciousness through a quantum lens and tackle a big question. As life appears to arise only from a life source, law of biogenesis, and consciousness seems to follow a similar pattern of requiring a conscious source. What might be the ultimate origin of both consciousness and life? Could this point to God as a first cause? If you're fascinated by the mysteries of the mind and the universe, I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments, suggest ideas for future videos, give this video a like, and hit that subscribe button to join our curious community. Let's embark on this mind-expanding journey together. Let's begin with the central challenge of our discussion, the complex problem of consciousness. Philosopher David Chalmers introduced this term to highlight a puzzle that has baffled scientists and thinkers for centuries. We can study the brain, map its neurons, and track its chemical reactions. But these efforts explain how the brain works, not why it produces the subjective experience of consciousness. Why does it feel like something to be you? Why do you experience the taste of chocolate or the beauty of a sunset? Traditional theories often suggest that consciousness emerges from complex brain processes. However, they struggle to explain why an insentient brain, made of atoms following physical laws, should give rise to any experience. The paper we're exploring today takes a different approach. It proposes a quantum information theoretic perspective to address this problem, avoiding the pitfalls of emergence theories. Instead of viewing consciousness as something that arises from the brain, the author, Danko D. Georgiev, suggests a radical idea. Consciousness might directly correspond to quantum state vectors in the brain. Let's break this down and see how it connects to broader questions about life, consciousness, and their origins. To understand this quantum approach, we first need to grasp some basics of quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics govern particles' behavior at the smallest scales, like electrons and photons. Unlike the classical world, where objects follow predictable paths, quantum particles exist in a state of probability. They can be in multiple states simultaneously, a phenomenon called superposition, until a measurement forces them into one state. Additionally, particles can become entangled, meaning their states link together even across vast distances. The paper suggests that consciousness isn't a byproduct of brain activity, but rather a fundamental aspect of the brain's quantum states. Georgiev argues that first-person subjective experiences, your feelings, thoughts, and perceptions, align with unobservable quantum state vectors in the brain. Meanwhile, the brain we observe through scans or dissections represents a third-person perspective constructed from classical information gathered when the environment measures specific quantum properties of the brain. In simpler terms, your inner experience of consciousness might be the quantum reality of your brain, while the physical brain we see is just a classical snapshot of that reality. This idea avoids the complex problem by rejecting the notion of emergence. Instead of asking how an insentient brain produces consciousness, it posits that consciousness is inherent in the quantum states. This perspective also sidesteps a challenge posed by classical physics: determinism. In classical physics, every event follows strict laws, leaving no room for consciousness to influence the brain. It would just be a passive byproduct. Quantum mechanics, however, introduces indeterminacy, allowing consciousness, as quantum states, to play an active role in decision-making and behavior. Let's connect this to the law of biogenesis and the question of life's origins. The law of biogenesis, often summarized as life comes from life states that living organisms arise only from other living organisms. Scientists like Louis Pasteur demonstrated this in the 19th century by disproving spontaneous generation, the idea that life could emerge from non-living matter. For example, Pasteur showed that sterilized broth wouldn't grow microorganisms unless exposed to existing microbes, proving that life requires a living source. If we apply this principle to consciousness, as the question suggests, we face a parallel. Just as life comes from life, perhaps consciousness comes from consciousness. The quantum approach in the paper supports this analogy. If consciousness corresponds to quantum states, and those states are fundamental to the brain's function, then consciousness might not emerge from nothing. It might trace back to a pre-existing conscious source, much like life traces back to a living organism. This brings us to the heart of the question. What is the original source of consciousness and life? Can we consider God as the primary source? Let's explore this step by step, weaving together the quantum perspective, the law of biogenesis, and philosophical considerations. First, let's think about life. The law of biogenesis tells us that life on Earth comes from prior life. Modern biology traces this back through evolution to the first simple organisms, possibly arising billions of years ago in Earth's primordial oceans. But science struggles to explain the very first spark of life, how non-living chemicals formed the first living cell. Theories like the RNA world hypothesis suggest that self-replicating molecules kick-started life, but they don't answer the ultimate question: where did the first life come from? If life only comes from life, something must have initiated the chain. Now, apply this to consciousness. If consciousness, like life, requires a pre-existing source, then the quantum states in our brains might trace back to an earlier conscious entity. The paper's quantum approach suggests that consciousness is fundamental, not emergent, meaning it might have always existed in some form, just as quantum fields permeate the universe. But this pushes the question further. What created those quantum states? What set the universe in motion, complete with the laws that allow consciousness to exist? This is where the idea of God enters the conversation. Many philosophical and religious traditions propose that God, as a supreme conscious being, serves as the ultimate source of both life and consciousness. In this view, God creates the universe, imbues it with the potential for life through physical laws, and instills consciousness as a fundamental aspect of reality. The law of biogenesis aligns with this perspective. If life and consciousness can only come from prior life and consciousness, then a conscious, living God could be the original source, a starting point for the chain of existence. The quantum perspective in the paper doesn't directly address God, but it leaves room for such interpretations. By tying consciousness to quantum states, it suggests that consciousness might be as old as the universe itself, woven into its fabric from the beginning. Some might see this as evidence of a purposeful design, pointing to a conscious creator who set up the quantum framework of reality. Others might argue that quantum states and physical laws arose naturally without a creator through processes we don't yet understand, like quantum fluctuations in a pre-universe void. Let's dig deeper into the God hypothesis. If God is the source of life and consciousness, what might that look like? In many theological frameworks, God exists outside of time and space, a conscious being who creates the universe with intention. In Christianity, for example, the Bible states, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth," and describes humans as made in God's image, suggesting that our consciousness reflects divine consciousness. Similarly, in other traditions, a supreme being or cosmic consciousness underlies all existence, giving rise to life and awareness. The quantum approach in the paper can complement this view. If consciousness is fundamental and tied to quantum states, then God might have created the universe with those states as the foundation for conscious experience. The indeterminacy of quantum mechanics could even reflect divine freedom, allowing for free will in a universe where consciousness actively shapes outcomes rather than being a passive byproduct of deterministic laws. However, science remains agnostic on God. The paper doesn't prove or disprove a divine source. It focuses on the mechanics of consciousness within the brain. Critics of the God hypothesis might argue that positing a creator simply shifts the question, where did God come from? They might prefer naturalistic explanations, suggesting that life and consciousness arose through physical processes we haven't yet discovered, perhaps in a multiverse where quantum fluctuations spawn countless universes, some of which develop life. This exploration of consciousness, life, and their origins opens up endless questions that bridge science, philosophy, and spirituality. The quantum information theoretic approach challenges us to rethink what consciousness is and how it fits into the universe. Whether you lean toward a scientific or theological explanation, this topic invites you to explore further. Dive into books like The Emperor's New Mind by Roger Penrose, which explores quantum theories of consciousness, or Biogenesis, Theories of Life's Origin by Noam Lahav, for more on life's beginnings. If you're curious about the God hypothesis, texts like The Language of God by Francis Collins offer a scientist's perspective on faith and creation. Follow research from institutions like the Perimeter Institute or explore philosophical works by thinkers like Chalmers. The more you investigate, the more you'll uncover the profound connections between science and the big questions of existence. Keep digging. What a journey we've had today. We've explored the hard problem of consciousness through a quantum lens, examined the law of biogenesis, and tackled the question of whether God could be the original source of life and consciousness. This intersection of science and philosophy pushes us to think deeply about our place in the universe, and I hope it inspires you to keep exploring. What do you think? Does the quantum approach resonate with you? And do you see God as the source of consciousness? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. Suggest topics for our next video, give us a like, and subscribe to stay curious with me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.